communication technologies to promote cultural diversity, social justice, and political democracy, as well as for economic growth and sustainable development. I seek for marginalized local voices to be heard. People are using newer technologies such as the net alongside older tools like radio to recreate and liberate public spaces, circumvent the high cost of print publication and large-scale broadcasting, and evade censorship by the state or by corporate media. Community media are usually discussed in the context of small-scale grassroots activism, yet many community-based organizations have become linked to larger civil society networks in a sometimes tense interface between local and global goals and concerns. So what we will be doing here this afternoon is exploring the relationship between community media, the global public sphere, and the movement for A2K. Now, in the opening plenary, we heard that the A2K movement emerged in order to force WIPO to adopt a development agenda. And in the same session, we also had a very important question posed to us by Dean Harold Cole. He asked, should the A2K movement be led by experts or by people at the grassroots level? Now, given the discussions that I've heard and that have taken place over the past 2 days, I would argue that the A2K social movement presently lacks clarity of focus in defining its development agenda. However, in promoting a distinctly developmental agenda, this panel will argue that people from grassroots communities and their issues should take the lead in shaping the development agenda for the A2K movement, or of the A2K movement. In this conference, I've also heard the word social justice being bandied about quite often. And in relation to this, I want to make the following point. It is important for us to consider that as a social movement, A2K comprises varied stakeholders with differential interests. And while this context might allow us to engage in a democratic way, it also does not always lend itself to partnership. And I think this point is particularly pertinent when we are talking about social justice in relation to a social movement that is straddling both sides of a very unequal global society. And in this case, I also think it's important for me to point out that I'm not simply talking about a conventional conception of the North-South divide, but also about the phenomenon of a growing South in the North. And given this context of growing inequality and social divisions that are reinforced by historically defined lines of division and exclusion, I put it to you that social justice can only take place within a framework of contestation, and that it can only truly be achieved if there are institutional reforms that shift the power base. I want to hand over to my panel, who, inspired by the work of their grassroots partners, will attempt to define the development agenda of the A2K movement from the bottom up. And we're going to start off with a presentation from Sasha Constanza-Chok. And just give me a moment to introduce Sasha properly. Sasha Constanza-Chok is a graduate student at the Annenberg School for Communication at USC, where he researches international media policy and the transnational movement for communication rights. He works with the Campaign for Communication Rights in the Information Society and the Indie Media Video Distribution Collection.
I'm George Tucker. I'd like to begin with a fact. A simple yet shocking fact. The circulation of this material
list of risks, which, just warnings up about, if you, purchase pirated audiovisual material, you'll be supporting networks of terrorism. We've heard this argument, and I've personally been called a terrorist by a representative of the Motion Picture Association at a trade negotiation discussion in Washington, the current FTA negotiations, when there's serious debate happening right now domestically about whether this is the right direction to go. And the response was literally, it's people like you who are giving support to terrorist networks that profit from, the sales of pirated goods. So polarization is not something that's only the province of activists and social movement organizations. It's coming from the state as well. But what I want to focus on today is sort of two main points. One of them is I want us to talk about and think about and consider together how it is that community media all over the world, actually, how community media makers are already engaged in the war of ideas, or engaged in the discursive battle that's taking place between industry, monopoly rights dependent industries, IPR industries, and their propaganda arms, and social movements, and others who fall on the other side of the A2K discussion. So I'm going to show several clips, and I'll talk a little bit more later about where they came from. And then the second point that I want us to really think about and discuss, and I probably will run out of time before we get into it, so hopefully in the conversation afterwards we can have it more, but it's the question of how, given that part of the framing of this conference this weekend is, how does A2K do movement building or connect to social movements? I want us to get a little bit deeper into that conversation because I don't feel like that's happening up here. And part of that is because there aren't people from social movements, by and large, represented certainly on the plenaries about social movement building and civil society building. And that's not to diss the people who are on those panels or the people who are here, because we've got a good group of people. But what we have is people from professionalized NGOs and a certain rung of civil society, folks who are involved in international NGO debates and international policy processes at a certain kind of level. And it would be nice in the future for us to have people like folks from Treatment Action Campaign, like folks from Via Campesina, folks who are from mass movements that are building base and have developed over time really clear and specific proposals around IPRs. And if we don't have them here at the table, then we can't really have an honest conversation about what it takes to do movement building. And when we are, as we are inviting representatives of the business community into this conversation, I think that we also need to be bringing folks from social movement organizations. So with that said, let me just show some of the clips. The clips that I'm going to show is that a couple of years ago, Microsoft UK put out a call online for media makers to do short films about how terrible it would be if somebody stole your intellectual property. And the prize was I think a PowerBook and Final Cut, or probably not a PowerBook, but prize was some kind of editing system, some kind of proprietary editing system and video camera and distribution of your film, which I think they would then own the rights to and it would help you get it seen. And so they put out this call, and they got a couple submissions. And the word of this contest started circulating among the networks of video activists internationally. It was translated, and people started discussing it and said, this is ludicrous. Let's do our own Thought Thieves competition. And so we did a call out for people to submit short films for a project called Thought Thieves, in which we would document how awful it would be if a large multinational corporation stole your culture, your very genetic code, your centuries-old seeds, and tried to claim them as their own. And I'm just going to show a couple of the clips that came back. that one was a specific campaign and appropriate a little bit of the chic of piracy while still building their market share and achieving the hegemonic status that they have now. 5 minutes, okay, I'll just show the clips then and we'll talk about it later. The process without end, creators base their works on previous works. This is the way that it's always been since the beginning.
Trust is the personal belief in the correctness of something. It is the deep conviction of truth and rightness and cannot be enforced. If you gain someone's trust, you have established an interpersonal relationship based on communication, shared values, and experiences. Trust always depends on mutuality. This process has been reshaped by the computer industry. Now a microchip does that task for you. The industry calls it trusted computing. This chip will be in computers, notebooks, servers, PDAs, cell phones, game units, DVD players, set-top boxes, watches, and it will be in your devices too. What has trusted computing to do with trust? Let us show you. In a trusted computing environment, the major goal is to protect us from potential threats. The original trusted computing idea is designed to let you decide what to consider as a threat and what to consider trustworthy. You can control by your own personal conviction. Trusted computing sounds great, doesn't it? The industry's interpretation of the trusted computing idea looks quite similar, aiming at the same, to find threats and make computing trustworthier. The main difference is that you cannot decide by your own what is trustworthy and what is not. Because they already decided for you, and they already decided not to trust you. So, if they don't trust you, why should you trust them? Trusted computing sounds great.
So I'm just going to end with Hands Out, but the last clip I think is, I'd like us to read it in the context of trying to think about movement building across sectors, just because it's an attempt to kind of very quickly, and well, I'll just play.